The Russo-Ukrainian War, Getting into Vladimir Putin's Head. Part 2, The Shaping of Vladimir Putin's Worldview. Hello, this is John Hnatio reporting for the Objective News Network. Welcome back to our series, The Russo-Ukrainian War, Getting into Vladimir Putin's Head. In part 1, we gave a very brief overview of Vladimir Putin's childhood, education, and his early career as an agent for Russia's KGB. In part 2, we will examine some of the influences around him that may have significantly contributed to President Putin's worldview. At the Objective News Network, we use a powerful research software tool called authentication to help us find only the most trustworthy sources to conduct our research and analysis of the news stories of the day. Our goal is to objectively provide all sides of a story based on true facts. So, let's start by typing in number of Russians killed in World War II. Authentication immediately brings us a data set at worldpopulationreview.com telling us, and I quote, the Soviet Union is estimated to have suffered the highest number of World War II casualties. As many as 27 million Soviets lost their lives, with as many as 11.4 million military deaths joined by up to 10 million civilian deaths due to military activity, and an additional 8 to 9 million deaths due to famine and disease. Those totals do not include the more than 14 million Soviet soldiers who were wounded during the war. Ukraine tallied the second highest casualty rating, with 1,650,000 military deaths and 5,200,000 civilian deaths. Close quote. From this, we learn another significant lesson as we try to understand the Russo-Ukrainian conflict and Vladimir Putin's thinking. Both sides have a legacy of engaging in warfare where civilians were necessarily part of the mix. Both soldiers and civilians were considered to be more as pawns on a chessboard rather than individual human beings, as both Russia and Ukraine fought off the Nazis during World War II. Both Russia and Ukraine also have an historical legacy of having their homelands physically invaded by wars of aggression. So let's type into authentication, how many times in history has Russia been invaded? Authentication takes us immediately to a data set appearing at Tufts Now entitled The Long History of Russia and War. Understanding how deeply embedded war is in Russia's view of itself may help us understand the invasion of Ukraine. So says the Tufts author of Russia, The Story of War. Here we are told by Dr. Greg Carlton, a professor of Russian studies at Tufts University, that, and I quote, Russia has always been a militarized country. It has done this, in fact, for its own survival. Flanked by Europe and Asia, Russia has experienced 3 major invasions in its history: by the Mongols in the 13th century, Napoleon in 1812, and Hitler in 1941. According to Carlton, in Russia, survival of the state itself has been a primary concern historically. Now let's type in, how many times has Ukraine been invaded? Immediately, Wikipedia comes up with the history of conflicts involving Ukraine with enough entries to fill 2 pages. Clearly, invasion and war are nothing new to Ukraine either. Next, let's type in, how many people were killed by Joseph Stalin? Authentication immediately takes us to a data set at allthat'sinteresting.com stating, and I quote, According to historians who studied Soviet archives before and after the fall of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin likely killed between 6 million and 20 million people. However, given the widespread and often unrecorded deaths in the Stalin years, it's certainly possible that that number is even higher, close quote. Or how about this data set at history.com entitled, How Joseph Stalin Starved Millions in the Ukrainian Famine? I quote from the article, the Ukrainian famine, known as the Holodomor, a combination of the Ukrainian words for starvation and to inflict death, by one estimate claimed the lives of 3.9 million people, about 13% of the population. And unlike other famines in history caused by blight or drought, this was caused when a dictator wanted both to replace Ukraine's small farms with state-run collectives and to punish independence-minded Ukrainians who posed a threat to his totalitarian authority, close quote. This is another very important lesson of history, helping to explain the Russian attitude towards Ukraine and its people. Certainly, Vladimir Putin grew up seeing that Ukraine was a subjugated territory of the Soviet Union, under the direct spheres of Moscow's influence that had been invaded many times before Mr. Putin came along. Okay, let's see some more about Vladimir Putin's thinking about Joseph Stalin by typing in, how does Putin feel about Stalin, into authentication. Here we immediately see a data set at the New Statesman entitled, Why Putin is Beholden to Stalin's Legacy. The Russian president has embraced the Soviet cult of fear and control. His invasion of Ukraine is a colossal gamble to secure his place in history, says Simon Sebag Montefiore. Montefiore goes on to say most Russian leaders have aspired to emulate the achievements of the two preeminent modern rulers, Peter the Great and Stalin. Both revolutionary czars, both brutal killers. One day, hopefully, Russia will be governed by someone who admires neither. Yet Putin is not Stalin. Stalin was a Marxist. Putin is a 21st century tyrant who, while co-opting elements of Romanov and Soviet imperialism, is a populist and nationalist, a practitioner of 21st century politics who deploys both old-fashioned military heavy metal and the new high-tech weaponry of social media. Montefiore goes on, yet Stalin could not be more relevant. Stalin's influence is imprinted everywhere in the state structure of Russia. He remains omnipresent. Putin's repression at home increasingly resembles Stalin's tyranny in its cult of fear, rallying of patriotic displays, crushing of protests, brazen lies, and total control of the media, although without the mass deportations and mass shootings, at least so far, close quote. That brings us to the conclusion of part 2, Shaping Putin's Worldview. Next time, we are going to delve a little bit more into what President Putin is really thinking. It is what it is for September 12, 2022. Thank you for watching. This is John Hnatio for the Objective News Network. We hope to see you next time for part 3 of the Russo-Ukrainian War, getting into Vladimir Putin's head.